I want you to start a think tank to do whatever you want. What would you do?
I still think we don't have a premier institution in Malaysia. And I think that tells you a lot how we have failed.
Welcome to the Are We OK podcast. My name is Dr. Bota or OKM, and today we have a very special guest. Peter is not here with us today, and I have managed to get an old friend, none other than intellectual, academic, think tanker, Mr. Abdul Razak Baginda himself, right? So, can I call you Razak?
Sure, of course you can.
Yeah, so I think we've known each other, or at least I have heard of you for a long time already. And, we'll go through your history and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure whether you remember the time when you hosted a talk show in RTM, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was years ago. Yeah, global.
Yes, that was when I first saw you,
Really
and I was sort of like going into university. This was in the 1990s.
Correct.
Kind of a thing. So, but yeah, for those who don't know you, you wanna just introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you're doing now.
Okay, I'm actually retired. I lead a very sedentary life now, but I still write. So, I just completed, not just a couple of years ago, I completed a book on China, which I did from basic research, meaning from zero. And I travel extensively, interview people, talk to academics, and came out with this book on China. And I'm actually in the midst of writing another book on another subject, which I've always been interested in writing. So that's what I'm doing now. So
what's the new book about?
It's actually a more thematic one. The last one was on China, the rise of China, and its impact on Asia.
Sure.
This one is more on the concept of leadership.
Okay.
It's tentatively entitled Asian Leadership Between Myth and Reality. Because as a continent, Asia seems to be more successful, notwithstanding Europe and the Americas, but North America. So if you compare with Africa and all the other parts of the world. So I like to explore whether there's anything unique and whether we can actually talk leadership in terms of a region, Asian leadership, whether there's anything special. So, for example, there's always an ongoing debate. I cannot remember the name. That's the thing about being 65. There's this very famous book written about the Kennedy administration. It's called the Best and the Brightest. And he examined whether the best and the brightest is actually the best. And his conclusion, interestingly enough, was that, yes, we always seek for meritocracy, the best and the brightest. However, the Kennedy administration proved beyond doubt that even if you have the best, you collate the best and the brightest in one room, you don't necessarily get the best result, because he examined the case of Vietnam, and Vietnam was a total disaster. And these were the best and the brightest, the best brains you can imagine in America, all collated in one room, and it was under the Kennedy
administration,
and continued into the Johnson administration, and it was a disaster. And then it was a whole concept of whether it was about hubris. That when you regard yourself as the best and brightest, and everyone regard you as the best and brightest, whether hubris creeps into your system, that you think that, hey, I know the best, I am the best, so any other deviating opinion gets shot down. So it's an interesting concept that while we strive for meritocracy, which is of course is very good, but at the same time, that book on the best and the brightest. So anyway, I was trying to look. So I got a bit embroiled into all these concepts about what constitute leadership. So So the book basically divides into three parts. The first is the concept of leadership. Second is to look at Asia within the context of the other regions. Why do I choose? Why do I associate leadership with a region, which is Asian?
And just to be clear, you're talking about political leadership here.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for pointing it out, because one of the conceptual difficulty I have is to classify what leaders are. You can have business leaders, you can have intellectual leaders, and you can have movers and shakers and all that. But you can all have political leadership. So I have to limit my focus. And as you quite rightly pointed out, it's going to be focused more on political leadership. And the last part of the book actually looks at very brief, all the various countries, and look at, like Korea and all that,
and you
all
look
the
at
more successful.
You look at the successful cases and maybe
Of
some
course.
of the not so successful cases.
Of course. I mean, there are a lot of failures as well. I mean, there's no doubt. But why is it that Thailand is a good example? We've had, since the first coup d'etat, if I'm not mistaken, 1932, 33, onwards, we have a series of coup d'etats. And then you have civilian governments, but you also have intermittent coup d'etats.
Yep.
Failure. I remember General Suchinda, I think it was General Suchinda, who, thought that it was the right time to roll in the tanks, but unfortunately it wasn't the wrong time. It was such an embarrassment. I think it was Suchinda, such an embarrassment that he had to crawl to the king to beg for forgiveness and all that. And then so you have that. But then Thailand today economically is regarded as one of the most vibrant countries in Southeast Asia.
And notwithstanding some of the challenges that it is currently facing. now.
Yeah, of course. Politically as well, and all. So, and the monarchy as well. And then of course, when looking at leaders, you have countries like Brunei, for example, which is an absolute monarch. So I have to also classify what I mean by leaders. So you have democratic countries, semi-democratic countries. I mean, look at Korea, for example, very successful, and suddenly you have this attempted coup, if you like, a political coup. Now, where did that come from? So
that's very surprising given its democratic history.
Considering that Korea is such a stable country for the last few decades, and suddenly you have this, and then even in Japan, despite the preponderance of LDP, suddenly they lost power, and then they gained power, and then the assassination of that prime minister,
Abe.
Abe. So it's kind of a challenge.
Sure.
But at 65, I think I can afford the time.
Okay. When do you expect this book to come out?
So everyone asks me that. I suppose in 10 years' time, I hope.
Okay. But in the meantime, maybe just dial back a little bit. You've always been an observer of politics, both domestic and global. And for this, particular episode, we'll focus more on global politics.
Sure.
But also bringing in its relevance to Malaysia. We both studied in the UK. I studied economics in the UK, and then you studied politics and government, back in the 1980s when this topic wasn't really that popular. Can you sort of draw us back as to what made you want to delve into this area?
Well, I must blame my father for influencing me, because at that point, I mean, at the age of 13, I left for the UK when my father was studying. He was at the LSE, and I remember at the age of 14, I was already exposed to some of his books. Two books really was glaring, and it was perhaps shaped my interest in politics and history. And the first was a book by Che Guevara.
Okay.
I think it was called, it was actually Regis Debray, Revolution, Don't Let Revolution. And then associated with that was Reminiscence of a Revolutionary, which is by Che Guevara. Those two books, but that's kind of a revolutionary bit. But you must remember at that point in 1980s, sorry, I beg your pardon, in 1970s, LSE was a bedrock of leftist activism, socialism, and all that. So it was no surprise that I was embroiled in that, even though I was only 13, 14.
Yeah, it's a very different place now.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's one of the most conservative institutions, but one of the best in the UK, if not the world. And then the second book really impacted me on my interest in politics was a book written by the then editor-in-chief of Al Ahram, the leading English newspaper in Egypt, by the name of Muhammad Haikal. He was also the advisor to President Nasser.
Yes.
So it was almost a memoir of his memoir, but really his association with Nasser. Okay. Going through all those periods. The book was written about 75. So going through the 73, October War and all that. So and I was fascinated in which how a man like Al Haram, a man like Haikal, working in a newspaper, got embroiled into being an advisor of Nasser. So to answer your question, I mean, these are things that really impacted me on that's where I wanted to go. But the unfortunate thing was that I wanted to specialize in Middle Eastern studies. I barely got into, in the UK, you have only two streams into higher education. Either you go through universities, and they have their
The A levels.
A level, but you have that entry. You have to go through. I can't remember.
UCAS.
UCAS. That's right. UCAS, and then you get and all that. But my grades were so appalling. Believe it or not, I think I got a D and an E or E and E. There's no way I could get into university, and it was quite late. So the new option I had was polytechnics. In those days, they had polytechnics, but they were all polytechnics and College of Higher Education were all managed by the degrees that they awarded those days were all governed by CNAA, which is like Council for National Academic Awards. So it was not like each polytechnic giving out their degrees, but there's a body.
There's a larger body.
So I entered, and I was so passionate about politics. So the only course I could find in those days, which I found, was politics and government.
And when this was in...
This was in 1979.
Okay.
So I did that. So I did my 3 years degree.
And the Polytechnic at that time was called City...
City of London Polytechnic. It was actually in East London. And of course, as you know, there was quite a few years back, the government decided that they upgrade to all universities. So now you have all, I don't even know what my Polytechnic is now called, because there was a lot of mergers and acquisitions of different institutions and all that. So anyway, and after that, I did my war studies at King's College. And I did
that
my
was your master's, yes?
Yeah, master's. And I thought it was kind of interesting because my lecturers were very people who influenced policy. I mean, there was a guy who subsequently became very famous, Lawrence Friedman. He became, an advisor to government and all that. So I was kind of fortunate that I did a master's degree, and later on, and I went back to Malaysia and I did my.
So after your master's degree, you came back to Malaysia, and then you were at the National Defence College.
No. I was teaching in the university. And then
which university was this?
It was in university. It was funny. I was doing University Pertanian, which is now University Putra.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, also teaching at University Kebangsaan.
Okay.
Because Kebangsaan had a department of political science.
Okay.
So I was teaching the strategic studies course. And then in 1988, at the age of 28, I was then offered a job because there was a vacancy at the Ministry of Defence. It's actually, the position is still called Head of Strategic Studies and International Relations at the Malaysian Armed Forces Defence College.
Yeah, and now it's a full-fledged university, UPNM.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a lot but in those days, that was the highest level of military education. So I became the civilian directing staff. So I stayed there for a few years.
How was the experience like? I mean,
Well, it's interesting because I was a civilian. I was a very young civilian, and then I entered an institution which is obviously rigid and regimental. And it took a while for me to adjust, because I'm basically someone who have never been confined, whether thinking wise or or physical. I've never been confined in the way a lot of people ask me, why do I always think different from others? Why is it that when everyone goes right, I go left, or everyone goes left, I go right? And I said that's because I've always been like that all my life.
A bit of a contrarian in that sense.
Yeah, and in fact, I still have this in 19 or 40 years ago. Almost 30 years ago, Straits Times did. I will send you this copy. Straits Times Singapore did a feature on me, and it was funny. He says that. And the headline was something like "The man who cannot stop talking." The man who will speak his mind.
Yes. And at the time, not many people in Malaysia would fulfill that.
And it was like spade. He calls a spade. And I got myself embroiled in the whole debate of the Islamization of Malaysia, of which I am totally against. In fact, it's not even Islamization. I would call it Arabanization, which is totally a different concept compared to what Islam is. But anyway, that's a separate story. But anyway, just to address you.
And you were the Defence College.
I was at Defence College for about 5-6 years, and then after that, it was funny. It was the reason why I left was because I quarreled with the commandant.
Okay.
It was very interesting. I quarreled with the commandant because there was we had different perspective of the concept of the cause. He wanted to change the cause, and I was, in retrospect, I suppose I was a little bit egoistic. I stood my ground, and I don't think my ground was as strong as I thought it was. In retrospect, I thought, and I was a total clash between this commandant and myself. So but I lost, but I won.
Sure.
Meaning that what happened was it went to the board, and the board is basically the Chief of Defence Force and all that, and they said that Razak should remain. But then after that, I resigned because I thought, having won, I better withdraw because I can't get along with him anymore. After that, I set up this think tank. It was in the 90s. The 90s was an interesting decade because politicians all had, aspiring politicians, or at least ambitious politicians, all had think tanks behind them.
Yes.
Mahathir had ISIS and
IKD.
Anwar Ibrahim at IKD, Institute Kajah Dasar.
Yes.
And then I set up one for Najib and all that. So when I was there for, I don't know, for quite a while.
This was the Malaysian Research
Malaysian Strategic Research Centre, MSRC, which I'm proud to say that it was listed as one of the better think tanks in Malaysia, and one of the Japanese, the Japanese did a kind of survey of all the think tanks.
We'll talk more about the think tanks ecosystem and how it has changed in the second part. Maybe just briefly, can you talk about what you did? Because I remember you published a lot.
Yeah, we did.
You had a lot of conferences that you organized. What was your strategy in terms of setting up that think tank?
That's, I must admit, because it was, we were not an academic, it's purely academic, intellectual think tank. We are more akin to those in the United States, where think tanks were more ideologically driven. Some think tanks, Brookings institutions, and some of the good ones, they are somehow they lean to certain philosophy.
Yeah, like Heritage Institute, for example.
Heritage Institute is one of the most conservative, but you also have others that are more liberal. So in that sense, we wanted to create as many platforms. And I must admit, because in the 1990s, there were not many platforms. There were not many channels in which we could voice. I mean, there was no podcast.
Yes.
There was no, YouTube.
No internet, or internet
nothing.
was just
so
starting.
You can imagine that we only have conferences, and they have to be physical conferences, and it consumes a lot of money. So we wanted to create space for people to discuss. So we discuss a whole spectrum of issues, from political, economic, business, and all that.
And was this also the time when you started doing your own talk show, Global? About that time, and Global was interesting because it was probably the first of its kind. God knows why they chose me. I can't even remember why they chose me. But, did they approach you, or
I honestly cannot remember. It's really long time ago. But so whatever it was very successful.
Yeah.
It was very successful.
I watched
and it was
episodes.
live. Yes. And I thought, looking back, I just go, bloody hell, they really believe me. I mean, when you're live, you can say anything you want to say.
Yes.
Yeah, you can. Lots of things can go wrong, and I think a few things did go wrong.
No, I must say you were a very able moderator.
Yes, and every Sunday, I remember, it's like almost a religious thing. I've got to go to RTM and get all sorted out, and I have to write the topics that I wanted, and then we got all the panels and all that. So that was very interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I remember somebody telling me, their experience on your show. You may not remember his name. His name is William or Bill Case, US academic. He recently passed away, actually. He was in Nottingham University running here in the Semenyih branch, and he appeared on your show a couple of times, and so did others as well. So I think that's sort of like a good background and context, because maybe some of our younger listeners, and maybe those who actually may have read about you in the news for different reasons, may not know about this background. So I thought it was important to set up that background. Yeah, and then we'll come back for the second part and talk about how the think tank and also the public intellectual discourse in Malaysia and around the world has changed with the advent of different platforms and different channels. Be right back. Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, the second part of this special episode where we're talking about global politics and also going into a little bit of history of our special guest, Razak Baginda, who is a very well-known name in the Malaysian think tank and also public intellectual ecosystem. Although, you've stayed away from the public limelight for a while. Let me ask you, Razak, how do you think the nature of public intellectual discourse has changed over the last maybe 10 years or 20 years because of changes in platforms, technologies that you talked about, from your opinion?
I think it has revolutionized it. I think it was Andy Warhol who once said that everyone has their 15 minutes time of fame. Okay? Nowadays, any idiot can have more than 15 minutes.
Sure.
And the more controversial you are, the more popular you become. It not necessarily people accepting your views, but the point is, you want the numbers.
Yes.
So if you go out there and say ridiculous things, and you get the numbers, that's what people are looking for. So unfortunately, not the victim, if you call it victim, is that we don't get very good discussions, despite the proliferation of platforms, whether podcasts or whatever, YouTube or your own
Spotify,
website or whatever, we don't get that. We don't get the kinds of, because any idiot,
so
if I use that word, could go up there and be unchallenged.
So you think it's sort of like been significantly dumbed down, the larger sort of like a public intellectual ecosystem?
You hit the nail on the head, because it not necessarily mean things are getting better. The problem is we are inundated with information, and we don't even know what is true these days. I mean, when you have facts and you have analysis of facts and you have the discussion and all the various perspectives, but sometimes even the facts are we become very lazy in a way. We don't students or even people like ourselves, we become sloppy. We shortcuts our work instead of going through basic research and going through the books. I'm guilty. I'm equally guilty of that. We all are.
Yeah.
So, but you see, there's a price we all pay. A lot more discussions out there. The choices are out there. But these days, it's the sensational items that get picked up.
So, for example, if let's say you're a right-wing or left-wing talk show host in the US, Bill O'Reilly or somebody like that, you're much more likely to be more famous. Your views are going to get picked up. You're going to have a bigger audience base compared to, let's say, somebody who's more mainstream, who's like doing a meet the press, for Chuck Todd or somebody like that in NBC. So that's
exactly.
That's the kind of
academics, they say they're always two-handed, right? On the one hand, on the other hand, right? Nobody wants to know that. Everybody becomes very simplistic now. We don't want to know two views. We just want to know one view. And as you said, it's always an extreme view that people are attracted to. And because the middle of the road view,
not so exciting.
Yeah, it's you're not gonna and that's why I believe it has contributed to the dichotomy of views, extreme views, and people get taken in by extreme views. So that's the price we all pay now with the proliferation, as I said, of all the platforms, because anybody can go up there and generate some form of interest. And if, of course, all governments are trying their best to curb extreme views, but you can't. There's only a limited way you can curb.
Well, especially if, let's say, everything is out there in the sort of like internet or the web. Yeah,
you can't.
Maybe just like to drill down a little bit more about this proliferation of views. How then do people who aspire to be, public intellectuals, or rather, academics, well-respected academics, thinkers, if they want to have their views aired, do you think that there are still legitimate channels whereby they can get a fair hearing, so to speak?
Oh yeah, I mean, let's not forget that there are many news channels and mainstream news channels that still feature academicians, experts in their show in order to elaborate sub-events. My daughter, as an example, has been called in by BBC World a few times already because she specializes in Iranian issues. Anything that props up on Iran, she gets a call and she gets call in.
And your daughter is based in the UK now?
Yeah, she's based in the UK and she specializes in Iran. So so she's already one of her name appears in the list. So when they want someone and she would be called up.
Sure.
So in that sense, but I don't see that so many in Malaysia.
We'll come back. We'll come into the Malaysia story.
You see what I mean? They don't
Yeah.
have that. I mean, you have in Europe and all the others. There's a news item, and then they invite a special guest, an expert, to analyze the events, and sometimes they have a debate.
Sure.
So to me, but you have to be reputable before you can get into the news.
Sure.
But apart from that, there are many platforms where budding public intellectuals. But then again, you have to choose your topic, and then again, there's no point, saying things that everyone knows. So there again lies the challenge. You tend to be more okay. I'm going to say something controversial. Say, for example, in China. Okay, today the China debate is split into two. Those who are almost an apologist of China, and those who take the quite the opposite view.
China can do no right.
Can do no right.
Yeah.
But in Malaysia, we find more of the first rather than the first and the second. Imagine someone comes in now. And says, okay, I'm not going to talk how wonderful China is. I'm just going to say how terrible China is. And everyone's going to sort of, okay, we've heard the good story. Let's hear the bad story.
You don't think there's a middle ground there that somebody
there is,
can?
But people are not interested in that. Okay. I mean, for me, in my book, very clearly, I take. Someone asked me recently in a talk that I gave, and God knows where, somewhere outside, somewhere not in Malaysia, and somebody asked me a point blank question: If I am to choose between the West, in this case the United States and China, where would I hatch my wagon? Where would I, put my wagon? And I said without hesitation, China. And this is why. Then of course I elaborate why China is the future in terms of blah 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 blah, and not the United States. United States, many have argued, is a declining power, whereas China is an ascending power.
Yep.
Nobody wants to latch your wagon to a descending, projectile. You want to have someone which is going high. You know what I mean? So in that sense,
well, that's not necessarily a controversial view. I think.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not. But then again, in my book, again, one has to be true to one's intellectual background. I believe.
Yeah. No, and that opinion that you talked about just now, probably similar to many other intellectuals in the region, including somebody like Kishore Mahbubani, for example.
I would take an issue that Kishore goes the other way around. I think Kishore has taken an extreme view.
Okay. You want to...
That is always... his view is like...
China can do no wrong.
And the West has done terrible things.
Okay. So
things.
You're somewhere in the middle?
No, I don't subscribe to Kishore's view.
Okay.
Because I think he has taken... and I think he plays to the gallery. Lots of his talks are in the Western world.
Yes.
And he's popular there because he's giving the different view. Because in the West, China is the bad guy. So here comes Kishore, goes into lots of platforms, and he talks about, West is declining, China, blah, 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 So everyone.
So there's a market for that?
Yeah, of course it is. Come to Asia, hey, he's not marketable in Asia.
So if, let's say, using your argument, somebody or, there would be a market for people, including academic, or public intellectuals to come out to say, actually, the China story is overblown, and these are 5 reasons why I think, we need to hitch our wagon to the West rather than to China.
If you do that here, you will get traction.
Okay.
For sure, because at the prevailing view in Asia, at least, in Malaysia primarily, is that China is the future. Okay? But then if you come out with a view and say, yes, but... and you give all the reasons and all the red flags, there are many red flags. In my book, I have illustrated why there are many red flags,
Can I just make a plug on your book? It's called The Global Rise of China and Asia, Impact and Regional Response. This is published by Palgrave, 2022. Is it available in our bookshops?
Unfortunately, it's an academic publisher.
And it's very expensive, right?
To me, don't bother.
Okay.
Don't bother.
Yeah, maybe we can get a summarized version through ChatGPT.
Macmillan, because they are, academic. They make their money from sales to institutions.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so let's come back to Malaysia, since you're familiar with the public intellectual ecosystem here, including think tanks, for example. Do you think that we've seen a lot more space and also opportunities for think tanks to to grow, to differentiate themselves, to put themselves out there, to stimulate greater intellectual as well as public policy kind of discourse in Malaysia over the past, I would say, 20 years?
There's some irony here. While there are many opportunities, I'm not seeing them. I'm not seeing the manifestation of this. You look back, say 20 years ago, where you don't have all these platforms. You have conferences and seminars, you have workshops, and now, and when you have workshops, you do have a kind of a captured audience, because they're there, the participants and all that, and through publications you have a wider audience. But these days, I find people are more. I have my doubts as to how people could actually get their views, because A, there may be too many, and number two, people are not taking advantage of that. And again, what are the issues? What are your views? Because today, because there's so many options, people are now beginning to choose. And you imagine, it's like, you remember in those days, well, I'm not sure whether you remember, I think you're too young for that, when we only had 3 channels on the television.
Yeah, I still remember those days. Yes, I'm old enough to remember
RTM1 or
that.
RTM2 and maybe ITN or
TV3 last
TV3.
time. Yes.
If you go back even further, before pre-TV3, you only have RTM1 and RTM2.
Yes.
These days, good Lord, before you finish going through all the channels, you finish your meal without selecting anyone. So imagine you have such a rate. But I think, okay, maybe I'm a bit not as adventurous as I was before. I have not, I don't get that kind of debate. I see more debates taking place outside Malaysia than I see now.
Okay, so
or maybe they are not grabbing the bull by the horns, maybe.
Okay, maybe I push back a little on that, and this is related to one of the questions I was about to ask you later, as part of this discussion, in a sense that could it be that you don't really see the efficacy and also the impact and the presence of some of these newer think tanks, and I'm talking about think tanks like the Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, Ideas. There are a few others as well.
Yes.
Iman Research, Emir Research, and their Center for Market Intelligence. So they are funded differently. They are differently constituted. But perhaps maybe because you are not so much in the think tank ecosystem now,
perhaps
that you don't really. That you may not follow some of these developments more closely?
I would put my both hands in the air, and I said I admit I'm not too plugged in. I'll give you an example. If you compare, say, influence of think tanks in government policies, I would have thought that. I'll give you one good example. Wisma Putra, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I mean, they've been there for years, right? Who's feeding them with all the intellectual input?
At one point in time, it was supposed to be ISIS, in a sense, yeah.
Okay, they established IDFR Institute, but that was basically more for training purposes.
Yes, correct.
But I would have thought they would have at least 2-3 think tanks. Don't have to go far. China. Okay, we have the Institute of China Studies under University of Malaya. China is so important to Malaysia. One would have thought we would have 10, 20 think tanks focusing on China.
At least more than one.
At least more than one.
Yeah.
At least more than one.
Yeah. There is one that I'm aware of in a private university. It's called the Belt and Road Research Center under Utah. But they are not very well known.
Right? What I mean is that you would have thought, right? And the enormous amount of investment and activities, Chinese commercial activities in Malaysia, one would have thought there'd be at least, and in terms of intellectuals as well. It's the same names that have been, if there's China expert, there's always like 5. 3, 5. And funny enough, I used to, in the 1980s, I specialized in Soviet affairs. My first few books were on Soviet. I was one on Gorbachev in Asia Pacific, was written in 1990 something. And then I wrote something on Soviet military power in the Asia Pacific region. 2 books on the Soviet Union. I was like one of 2 that, in those days. And given the education level, blah blah blah, and all that, you would imagine there's more people working on China. Today, there's only a handful of people working on China.
A handful of serious people.
Okay, well, and if you look at in terms of books, I dare say, My 2 books, I've got 2 books published by, one is on Malaysia, China, published by Routledge, and then I've got one on the book on China that you mentioned, Pelgrim Macmillan. I dare say that not many Malaysians have actually got 2 books published by serious academic press. I would certainly like to see more debate on China.
So let me sort of spend a little bit more time on that in the sense that what do you think are some of the reasons why there aren't enough serious academic and also intellectual institutions, people, discourse on some of these important topics? Is it because the government hasn't really planned this out in a more systematic manner from the Ministry of Higher Education perspective? Is it because we don't have enough public intellectuals or academics who have more of an entrepreneurial spirit like yourself, for example?
Yeah.
What do you think is driving this dearth?
Well, a few factors. One, of course, the pool. The pool is limited.
But it should be growing, right? According to what you said just now.
Okay. I mean, unfortunately, Malaysians have got this mindset of, I've got to finish my degree and I'm going to go and get a job, and the job is more commercially oriented, motivated.
But we have a lot more public universities and private universities.
I give one good example. Wisma. I always go to Wisma because I'm a critic of Wisma Putra. Wisma Putra. They should already have in-house experts. Okay, do they have? No.
On topics like China.
China's our
US.
biggest trading partner. Where are our China experts within the Wisma Putra? They're not there. They could tap into former ambassadors. They could at least have weekly platforms, or for serious discussions, or even the monthly meeting.
IFDR could facilitate that.
Any of them could have, but nothing. And you would have thought that,
And what's the reason? What is the reason for that?
I would have been critical. I've always thought that, it's not the government. It's the institutions. They're not. They don't think outside the box. They think that, okay, I'm going to work this and that's it. I've got no time to look at that.
So basically, the civil service is just...
The civil service they can organize and manage it, but they should be more open to different views. To them, Wisma Putra holds the monopoly on foreign issues, foreign policy, and they are not willing to bring in other people in, experts and all that. And to me, just one simple thing that they could do is that apart from having briefs, monthly brief, get 5 China experts. One on domestic politics on China, one on economy, one on foreign policy, one on defense, and one on, commercial, for example. Get 5 of them, assemble them, pay them every month, come to Wisma Putra and give a briefing. And all the people in Wisma Putra, whoever can attend.
Maybe other civil servants from other ministries as well.
And all they do every month without fail, is to update them. Okay, last month, politically, domestic politics, this. I tell you, I don't think we are so much in the know on what goes on domestically in China. Even I myself, I am handicapped because I don't plug into the domestic and we all know is the domestic politics of China within the CCP that actually drives exactly, and yet we neglect that. And Wisma Putra, you are doing foreign policy. Everyone knows is textbook that domestic factors influence greatly on the output of foreign policy. And that's almost textbook.
So that's the Wisma Putra, the civil service side. How about the academic institutions?
Okay, academic institutions. I'm sorry to say this. I go to bookshops, and I love bookshops, and I've always loved bookshops. And you go to a bookshop. Everyone
Kino,
knows
for example.
Kino.
Yes.
Okay, that's the best bookstore. You go to Kino, and you look at the Malaysian section. It's appalling. Or forget about that. You go to Foyles, you go to Waterstone, you go to all the various big stores or
in London,
or in America, and Borders or whatever, and you go to the Southeast Asian section. You're hard pressed to find any books on Malaysia. You find books on Thailand, you find books on Indonesia, quite a number of books on Indonesia. But on the Malaysian side, hardly any. And you begin to wonder, hey, what's happening? You come back to Malaysia and you look at, we are just not publishing enough, and enough of quality. That's why I say I don't want to brag too much, but not many Malaysians are writing at the global level.
Sure.
We write for university presses domestically. Fair enough. But you want to really get your books out there. One of my dream is to write a book published by Simon & Schuster, for example, which is not so much an academic press, but more for where I could be on the 10 top list.
Sure.
You don't find academic books on the top 10, but you find more readable books on
like
that.
maybe like a Paul Krugman type of a book.
Paul Krugman.
Popular academia.
In those days, you have remember Fukuyama, Francis Fukuyama.
Yeah, the end of history.
Those days have gone. Those people have gone. In a way,
Frank
replaced
is still
by new
around.
people.
Yeah.
I know, replaced by new people.
Yeah.
But where are the Asians? We are not out there. And all we find is Kishore. Kishore Mahbubani, and of course his title is so, I cannot remember can we think, can Asian think, and so things like that. There was one, and then and now the end of the West, and all. So these are all catchy titles and all that. So to me, despite the proliferation of so many platforms and all that, I'm still staff, and as you said, maybe I'm handicapped because I'm not, I myself is sloppy and lazy.
Not lazy, but I think maybe you've taken on
lazy,
different roles. Okay,
Lazy.
so if let's say I understand that you also tried to start up your own think tank later on, after MSRC. I think it was called Icon.
Yes, I did.
In 2017.
Okay, that's very, very good. Sort of refresh my memory. We wanted. I give you I don't mind sharing this. We wanted to have. In fact, we started. We call it diplomatic dispatch. And diplomatic dispatch. What we did was we assembled 3-4 experts. An expert on economy, expert on domestic politics, and a few others. And it was like every month we invited the diplomatic community, and a lot of them came. And because they want to be updated every week, and every month. We did that, but unfortunately, these things need the dollars and the
funding.
The funding. Yes. And, funding is just, maybe because we were not marketing ourselves. And we did create a lot of platforms. And that's when I discovered that, hey, my do, which is kind of very humble setup, and lots of people actually turn up, and they said that they always say we don't have enough of this. Then I begin to wonder, you would have expect, given the pool being bigger and bigger, you should get more, but we're not getting. You see, it's different from. You see, that's the problem about the internet world. It's what is the word? There's a decoupling of human interaction, and that's you and your audience who you cannot see.
Sure.
And the interaction, if you're going to be comments or not, it's also limited. The engagement, and it's different from your conferences and seminars where people could actually debate.
And maybe on that note, I think. Exactly what you say, there's still an important need for physical conferences, where you get public intellectuals, you get public officials to come in the same room to discuss and talk and to rub shoulders. An example would be something like the Munich Security Conference that took place recently.
Yes.
With,
I would urge Malaysians to think a little bit outside the norm. You see, when we think of conferences and seminars, the first thing we look at is budget. And the thing that consumed the biggest budget is either the venue or the food. And I'm sure, Doc, you've been to conferences in the Western world. Biscuits and sandwiches, that's all. And we go for lunch. Here, it's a buffet style. And people are waiting. Hey, what time is lunch? Like what are they serving for lunch?
It's
tea, buffet.
And then
there's a mid-morning tea, there's lunch, and there's afternoon tea. You go to all these Western conferences, it's biscuits and coffee and tea, and that's it. And to me, that's all you need. You go there not for eating.
Sure. So one example, I think, in terms of conferences that are important, I talked about the Munich Security Conference in Asia. I would say that the Shangri-La dialogue is
Yes.
probably one of the most important.
The most important, I think,
in terms of getting together the defense ministers of different countries. It's based
I was
outside
actually
Singapore.
privileged to attend the first.
Okay, yeah. You want to say?
It was very, very interesting because, in those days, it was the first, and then it was actually driven by IISS. They organized it.
They're still the main partner.
They are. And in those days, there was a guy called Chipman. I don't know whether he's still there. Is it Chipman?
Yeah, John Chipman.
John Chipman.
Yeah, he's not running the show now, but he still comes for the event.
Yeah, okay. So when I attended the first one, I was very impressed on the quality because they pitched it at the very top, and they got it right. Because they say, okay, we're going to create a platform where all the they brought together two types of people, academicians and officials. They actually were trying to bridge the gap between those people who are only the intellectuals who really are not practitioners, and together with the practice, and on the practitioner side too, political and military. So we got politicians who are ministers and even very, very high level. I remember the one I attended, we had Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense.
Paul Wolfowitz, who later became the dean at SAIS in...
Yeah, but he was also in IMF or something. Was it IMF?
World Bank.
World Bank, I beg your pardon. So I remember he represented US, and that was probably the number 2 in the Defense Department, and the most powerful and the biggest budget in the world. So he attended. So I think they got it right because once they pitched it at that level, then everybody else, and it became an event which no one wants to miss. Everybody wants to be invited. Sure. And they replicated it, I believe, in the Manama conference, which covered the Middle East. And to me, they were, to me, it's very successful. And interesting enough, and I pay tribute to Singapore for having the foresight and giving, and to give the facilities and all that. I think they were smart. They knew that this was going to be big, and the name, and Shangri-La, of course, was quite willing to open up the doors and host it, and it was a win-win for everyone. Now, is as you said, it's the leading security conference in Asia.
Yeah. So maybe just to end this section, if let's say the Prime Minister or a large benefactor were to tell you, Razak, I'm going to give you unlimited resources. I want you to start a think tank to do whatever you want with it. What would you do?
I'll subcontract it. I'm too old. No, to be honest with you, I still think despite all that, Malaysia has become rich, blah, 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 and all that, and there's a lot of private sector funding, I still think we don't have a premier institution in Malaysia.
Okay.
And I think that tells you a lot how we have failed,
as a country.
As a country. You see, you look at the United States. I don't want to brag too much. In fact, not even the United States. Look at China. The number of think tanks that have flourished in China. I mean, while doing my research, I went to Peking University, and I was at the School of International Studies. I can't remember what precise. And I also went to the Foreign Studies University. I mean, you could feel the vibrancy, the intellectual vibrancy when I spoke to the people. I also went to Shenzhen University because I knew somebody there, and we were discussing very openly on certain very key issues and all that. Even though there was just one-to-one, I was just researching for my book. When I come to Malaysia, when I talk to my so-called fellow,
think tankers.
I wouldn't call myself intellectual, but and I don't get that vibrancy. I don't get that satisfaction. And I taught 1 year in University of Malaya, it was only a few years back, and I said did one course. I can't remember what the course was called, and I thought
it's a master's program.
It's a master's program. Yeah, it was in the evening. So, and I tell you, I got a lot of satisfaction from there because I miss the days when I would intellectually argue and talk. To me, the lecture is only 20%. It's actually the Q&A, and I would urge the students to ask me, and I said, if there are no questions, and I said, I have failed, because either I'm perfect, and I'm not perfect, so there must be lots of gaps. So you need to. I don't find that in Malaysia. I don't find people, whether they are students or even among intellectuals. I do give talks sometimes at University Science and a few other universities. No, University Science only. But even that, I don't get that kind of
cut and trust, that kind of
love
academic.
that. I mean, to me, hey, someone's got to challenge my brain.
Sure.
I don't get that.
Okay. So I think with that, probably a good reminder that I should invite you to my university, Taylor's University, to engage with some of our students and maybe start a master's level program that will engage people like you and others to have this kind of intellectual discourse that the country needs very much. So with that, we'll come back and then we'll talk about geopolitics, including Trump 1.0, Trump 2.0, and other interesting topics that we'll cover. Be right back. Welcome back to this final session of the Are We OK podcast with our special guest, Dr. Abdul Razak Baginda. I forgot to mention just now, after your master's, you completed your PhD DPhil at Oxford University. And maybe you want to say a little bit about that before I go to the geopolitics side of things.
Well, it was you went to Cambridge.
For my master's, yes.
Anyway, the thing about going to Oxford, apart from the academic side, it taught me a lot about being in a premier institution. And you know what struck me when I compared to in Malaysia? In Malaysia, if we're setting up a department, for example, or we're setting up a new institution, the majority of the budget will go towards the building.
Buildings, yes.
Right. Because to them, I can see this is the building, the money has gone here, this is an institution. And then if you consume 80% of the budget on the building, you only have 20% to spend on the brain power, which is what the value of the institution is, not a bloody building. Okay, at Oxford it's quite the opposite. Famous institutions are housed in a house. Basically, some of them are housed, and of course, depending on funding. But the minute you go through the threshold, the door, you look at the faculty members, the amount of academic work that they have produced is astounding.
The quality
is superb. So we have here in Malaysia, we pride ourselves in edifices, but no substance. But intellectually, it's the substance, not the form.
Sure.
That's important, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think in Malaysia we missed that bit.
Sure, and maybe we're still missing it now. I'll come back to that question. When we wrap up.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about geopolitics.
Yeah, sure.
And you are a keen observer. You've been observing this all your life. You've been writing about this as well. Maybe I'd like to start off with Trump 1.0 because now we're under the second Trump administration. What do you think? What was it about Trump 1.0? Do you think was important in shaping geopolitics in ways that are still relevant to today?
Okay, I think we must remember he got into the presidency 1.0 with the sole idea of making United States great again. So and everyone recognizes that US was at that point a declining power. It has reached its peak and it was declining. Some would argue that it reached its peak post-war, but started to decline with Vietnam War. A slow decline. If you read Paul Kennedy's iconic book, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, he talks about imperial overstretch. And US was clearly, even though they did not have colonies, but they had basically proxies and prop-up states and all that, and they were running thin. So to me, if you look at, and then of course when he came in, and if you look at, there was no intellectual nor ideological basis of his presidency. It was just to make America great, and it was something that he could latch on, and it was it was the sound bites that was important. That drove him to the presidency. Now, having been to the White House, he then had to face real things,
challenges,
real challenges. Then, in order to write that, he picked on a few so-called enemies, because in order to make America great again, it's not about win-win. To him, is that we win, somebody must lose, and China must lose. But that's why now we're seeing the first few weeks that he entered in his presidency 2.0 was to start looking at China again. So
Again.
So there was a bit of a gap when he lost power, but when he came back, he must have remembered, hey, I'm going to pick up the pieces where I left.
Business.
Unfinished business. But so if we address at his first presidency, and it was like, building the wall, things like, it was almost sensational foreign policy. It was almost a presidency based on sensation. But then again, what do you expect from someone of his background? I'm not saying he's good, I'm not saying he's bad. He's got that background, he's a businessman.
Showman.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of showmanship. And you could see his presidency was actually marked by his, if I can use this word, his flamboyancy. Not that he was flamboyant, but you could see him, right? Now, that's my assessment of his first presidency. On his second presidency, although we're still very new into it, you could see that we are already beginning to see some of the remnants of what he, like you said, unfinished business. But then he is now, in a way, 4 years, was it 4 year gap?
Yeah, 4 year gap.
And things have changed a little bit. China is becoming more powerful. The US has not really, you could make America great again, but then again, you must make sure that America is more competitive. And that's not easy to make. And everyone knows that America competitiveness has declined over the years. And China efficiency, if you like, has increased. And not just China, but there are also other countries that are also coming up. And then, the first thing, and then BRIC as an organization, which was becoming very vibrant, and it's kind of the elephant in the room. What did Trump, one of the first few things he did was to gun it down.
Well, he said that if BRIC countries wants to set up an alternative currency, I'll put 100% tariffs on them. Something like that.
Yeah, and to start a tariff war, and it was so in a way you can see some weird things about Greenland and all that stuff, Alaska and all that.
Yeah,
I mean,
Canada. Yeah,
Canada. Sorry, Canada. And so you begin to wonder. But however, I think he has, a lot of countries, I think, have already moved on in a way. If you look at the Middle East, you look at Saudi Arabia, there was the last 5 years, especially under MBS, you see they're changing, more attuned to global mainstream.
Having their own agenda.
Their own agenda and all that. So I think if Trump doesn't realize that 4 year gap is actually quite significant, he's going to be in for a surprise.
What sort of surprise?
Well, for example, you see, if you look at the relation, just look at Saudi Arabia, for example. You have Saudi Arabia, you have Iran in the Middle East, two rival powers. Now, we know that United States has already pledged its allegiance to Saudi and vice versa. But you also have to deal with Iran. And US has basically shut its doors on Iran. You can see Saudi Arabia refusing to be sucked into the US vacuum cleaner because it knows that, hey, you really have to also balance what's happening in the Middle East.
And Saudi were thinking about joining BRICS. Their membership is sort of like uncertain right now.
And with MBS, I'm not surprised if MBS is, I can't rely on the United States anymore. And this Gaza and this whole episode of Trump's policy towards that has really split the Middle East even further. So and has made a lot of Middle Eastern leaders very uncomfortable.
Okay, so in terms of having to deal with Trump 2.0, my sense is that a lot of countries are trying to put themselves in Trump's shoes, in the sense that he's a very transactional guy. He likes, show business. He likes the flamboyance and all that kind of stuff. How do you think Malaysia should try to engage with the second Trump administration?
You see, unfortunately, the world is a bit more divided now than it was before. Okay, and the world is divided in the United States camp and the Chinese camp. And somehow or other, there is this feeling in Malaysia, and I suspect in many parts of this world, many parts of Asia, is that are we sure with China, but we're not sure with the United States because the United States is declining. And everyone seems to suggest that let's go with the Chinese, but there's still a lot of reservation. So we're trying to balance our relationship between the United States and the Chinese. However, the challenge is because China and US are rival powers, and the signals that we send to either one could be negative. For example, if we are too close to the Chinese, the Americans would be suspicious, and vice versa. I give you one example: port calls by naval ships, participation in
naval exercises,
and then not just any naval exercises, scenarios. Okay, when the U.S. strike group comes to this part of the world, they focus on the trouble spots.
South China Sea, for example.
South China Sea. Now, and if Malaysia participates in that, just imagine this, right? Just hear me through. If Malaysia participates in that sort of maritime exercise involving U.S. fleet and all that, and the scenario is, in the South China Sea, and obviously in any military exercise scenario, there is the enemy, and obviously the enemy is China. Imagine how the Chinese look when we participate, because we have a bilateral military exercise with the Chinese, and they kind of must be uncomfortable, isn't it? I mean, these guys were one day seeing us as the enemy in our exercise, and next day cooperating with the Chinese in another exercise. So to me, it's like everyone knows that there is this looming challenge, which is the South China Sea, and everyone seems like there's an elephant in a room, but nobody wants to see the elephant.
So do you think Malaysia can continue to try to
balance,
have our cake and eat it?
Well, see, the thing is, I don't think our relations with the United States is as good as it should be.
Okay. Why do you think that's the case?
In a way, I think we're not balancing enough.
Okay.
In a way, we're like,
it's like an unbalanced balancing act.
It's like also Mao Zedong, who said that leaning to the east and west. I cannot remember. You remember? There was a period in which he says China has to lean more towards the east, and because of the rivalry with Russia in those days. Yeah. So anyway, I think because look at, you can't fault Malaysia as well, because the investments are coming in from the Chinese. American investment, Western investment is drying up. To some extent, you would know more of that. Yeah,
not quite, but but China is becoming more important.
I mean, look at some of the big infrastructure projects, and most of them the Chinese are coming. And the reason why the Chinese are coming in is because of funding. With their Road Belt Initiative funding. And it's like
the ECRL, for example.
ECRL is it's like a glaring example. Until today, I still don't know what the budget is, because it's kind of a
50 to 60 billion ringgit.
Yes, it's a moving target, right? In a way. But, I in my book, I made it very, very clear that, it may be 30 million or 50 billion, so I beg your pardon. And that, fine, we may be able to accept that figure. But at the end of that whole project, with all the VOs, variation orders and all that, it could be double. We will never know,
and we will have to we'll have to pay the interest for that for a long time.
There you go. You remember? I think I in my book I mentioned about how we were all caught in the appreciation of the yen, because in those days we took heavy yen loans. The Japanese governments were giving a lot of yen loans, and we all subscribed to the loan. And then at one point, the Japanese yen appreciated, and we were all.
Yeah, because of the Plaza Accord and yes.
So in that sense, you don't know, we're not talking about 5 years, we're talking about at least 20, 30 year project, So to me, I think Malaysia should be a little bit, not to lean to the West, but a bit more. You see, if you look at the typical Malaysian foreign policy, spectrum, the first few years, Tunku Abdul Rahman was all pro-West. Then we were more equidistance. And now we're more almost pro-East. We sort of abandoned
leaning more to China.
I would prefer if we balance a little bit, a bit more in the middle, as opposed to being, but at the same time, we have to be skillful. We have to be more dexterous in the way we manage our foreign policy and giving the right signals and
So on the signals part, let's say I were to give you this scenario whereby and you may have done this already. I don't know, and I don't want you to disclose. If let's say the Prime Minister said, okay, we're going to have a cabinet retreat, and all my ministers are going to be there. I'm going to be there. Share your views on how Malaysia can maybe rebalance between East and West, and even other areas of the world? How would you respond?
Apart from the so-called investment side, okay, we're talking about the government, what the government can do. First and foremost is to actually engage them at all levels. But before we do that, we must have good people to engage them. And this is where I think we are severely lacking.
Okay.
This is where I think the government should be more open-minded to bringing incorporating intellectuals, people who can talk and articulate. I'm not in any way suggesting that our civil servants do not, but I think there is no harm in bringing. For example, okay, we're gonna start now. We have a medium-term deliberate policy to get closer to the United States. For example, first and foremost, I would say, who's our ambassador there now?
Currently, we don't have. Right?
It's a rhetorical question. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, who's our ambassador now? So, his performance. No, let's bring in a heavyweight. Someone who can articulate, someone trained in the United States, knows the Americans very well, speaks very well. He's there. That's for because he represents Malaysia in the United States. Doesn't matter, he or she represents Malaysia in the United States. That's the first. Secondly, let's have more platforms where we can engage the Americans. I tell you, it's appalling that Malaysians do not engage their intellectuals, their think tanks. The United States, the think tanks play a leading role in foreign policy for Malaysia.
Yeah. CSIS, for example.
All that.
Yeah.
You know, Brookings, CSIS in Georgetown, the whole works of them, all surrounding Washington, you know, and New York. We don't engage them. Our ambassadors don't attend conferences that they have. They don't know them. On the reverse side, the Americans, when they come here, the British, they all are engaging our so-called intellectuals. But we're not doing the same.
Why is that the case?
I think because of we don't send the right people. Number two, maybe they're not motivated. Depends on the person. That's why I said, if you have an ambassador who is dynamic, and he says, I'm gonna get my staff to be engaging the American intellectuals. The first thing I would do is I would have a list of leading think tanks that I would call on. I would call on the director or call on the president of the think tank.
Maybe offer to be, to host a talk.
To give a talk, and call them to the Malaysian embassy, talk to them, engage them. You need to have that. First thing, because you have, at the end of the day, it's still human capital that we talk of. We can have all this YouTube and all. Those are just platforms. You see, sometimes we miss the point. These are platforms. If you can have the best platforms, but the input the substance is nothing, it's just going to fall flat. So this is where I think we severely lack. I hate to use Singapore as an example. Singapore is quite the opposite. I've interacted. I'm not sure because I've sort of gone out of the diplomatic world and engaging them. I mean, in those days, I remember meeting Singapore diplomats. They were really top notch.
People like Professor Chan Hing Chi, for example.
Chan Hing Chi, Tomiko,
Bilahari, Kausikan,
and the guy who became good friend of mine, Ong Keng Yong. These are our ambassador, our commissioner. I mean, these are names that we still remember. And today I was told they are still as dynamic because they get the best and the brightest, if I can use those words. The best and the brightest get to Wisma Putra, Foreign Office. And the same in the US, same in the UK. The best and the people who can articulate. Compare them with us.
Okay, so you feel that there's a gap there?
No, because these are our voice and ears and eyes in the West. Because if we don't have that, we don't engage the people there. They're sloppy. They don't. You have to go and you have to meet these people. You have to meet your counterparts. You have to go, not just embassy dues. You have to go out to meet the intellectuals, meet the commercial people. They're not doing
engage
that.
with them. Yes.
Engage with them,
Okay.
and then you establish the links,
the rapport, so to speak.
The rapport.
Yep. So there's no replacing that kind of old school diplomatic kind of engagements, physical.
Because at the end of the day, that is a substance.
Sure. Yeah.
We sometimes look at the platforms and miss the substance.
Yeah. You'll find no quarrel with me on that. But how about, let's say, on the Malaysian side of things, here in Malaysia, what can some of our cabinet ministers do better, for example?
I feel, from my little experience that I have, is that number one, we are reticent. We do not speak out. We are so worried about whether we are politically correct. And even professionals who are supposed to be professionals are not being professionals. Let me elaborate. For example, if I'm a minister, whatever the ministry is, I will look at the university and at least I said, okay, I'm going to appoint 5 experts in the university and I want to meet them every month. And they will provide me inputs.
Sort of like informal advisors,
Yes.
so to speak.
Why can't we have advisors? Why can't we have designated advisors? We have special officers. Hey, special officers are just photocopy. You know what I mean. They
Not quite.
You know what I mean.
When I was in government,
what I'm saying
they were
is,
more than that. Yeah, but
what I'm saying is, they are not the. They can organize. I can get my special officer and said, okay, you give me a list of 10 academicians and let me go through, give them background, and let's engage them every month. They can and then I would chair as a minister, because then I get all my ministry people to attend, and all the 5 of them every month, every Monday, the first Monday every month, you come and give us a briefing of what's happening. Why can't we do that?
I'm not sure about other ministries, but I do know that the minister and deputy minister of MITI, they do that on a quite regular basis.
This is what we need to do. Because you know why? Because sometimes you have the civil servants, you have the professionals, but within each ministry, for example, in health, you have the professional and you have the civil servants. But you need to engage what's happening out there. Bring in the industry, exactly. The pharmaceutical people and all that. And I just think that our universities are untapped. And if you give them a stipend, a kind of a recognition stipend, and even an appointment. I mean, people love to get appointed as special advisor. You can have special advisors. Why not? 5 of them as a team, you know.
So maybe on that note, the Prime Minister has appointed a couple of special advisors for ASEAN, for our ASEAN chairmanship and outreach. The full lineup is not known yet, but at least 2 have been seen with him in public. One is former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin. The other one is former Singapore Foreign Minister George Yeo. I think Prime Minister has had more engagements with Thaksin, at least the ones that he publicized. What does it say about Prime Minister Anwar's approach, in the sense that he's not appointing Malaysian advisors, but appointing, let's say, non-Malaysian advisors? What are the pros and cons?
It makes sense, because after all, we're dealing with ASEAN. So I suppose if you have Thaksin, may not be the right choice or the wrong choice, but if you have someone from Thailand, and then at least you can have, because Thai, in the ASEAN family, you have the big brothers. You have
Indonesia.
Indonesia got the big. Indonesia, Thailand. Thailand covers the Cambodia, Laos, that sort of
Myanmar.
north in Myanmar, and then Indonesia covers the more archipelagic area, Philippines and all that. So it makes sense for him to listen to the views of that. But I don't know what he has in mind in terms of appointing them as either a group or individual, meaning that they meet regularly and meaning they have a platform by which they meet together as a collective advisors, or on a
maybe WhatsApp.
No. I mean on a kind of opportunity basis. Meaning,
Okay.
Or like, okay, I can call Thaksin and Thaksin would engage me on this, or whoever. I'm not sure what he has in mind. But I would also like to see maybe a group of advisors, local advisors who specializes on ASEAN, to provide input to him. If it's not to him, or at least to his officers, but better if he sits in and listens, because after all, at the end, if the Prime Minister presides over such a meeting, it elevates the importance of that.
Maybe somebody like Professor Faiz, who's the chairman of ISIS, maybe he's doing a little bit of that now. I know he does some speech writing for the Prime Minister on some of his foreign trips. Would that fit into your description?
Well, I remember I was actually offered a job in ISIS way back in 1984, believe it or not. But it didn't work out because my university was not willing to let me go. But anyway, that was history. So I was actually involved in ISIS for all those years.
When Nordin Sopi
was there. And of course he was the he was the kind of the moving force. He was able to move because he was also the special advisor to Dr. Mahathir. So the rapport between Mahathir and ISIS became very close, primarily because of the personal relationship between the late Tan Sri Nordin Sopi and Dr. Mahathir. And so to me, you have to have that. But some would argue that ISIS has lost that sort of
that luster.
I was about to use the same word, as it used to have. In those days, and it's kind of like, and they still do the roundtable, Asia Pacific roundtable thing.
APR.
I mean, it's already like it's not, you know what I mean, right?
A bit stale, is it?
Oh, exactly.
Okay.
And it's not, you want to get you cannot match the Shangri-La dialogue. So you have to find a more niche area, because Asia Pacific roundtable is basically the cheaper version of the of the Shangri-La dialogue,
and maybe less prestigious. Yeah.
That's why I say the cheap version, the Tesco version, and not the Waitrose or the
Okay.
you know what I mean, right? So they have to be more
strategic, maybe.
Strategic, but more focused, and not be more, for example, and they should be more inclusive. I mean, it was really funny. You go to any US leading think tanks, they would have experts say they identify the area. It's usually regional based. Latin America, you have 4 or 5 experts. China, 4 or 5 experts. Asia, so you have experts on Malaysia, experts on this. Where are they in Malaysia? Where are our experts? They're not being brought in. And I find that as a kind of isn't that textbook for us to do? But we're not doing it. We are not tapping the resources that we have.
So maybe a couple of concluding points. Do you think that even if, let's say, we have an ecosystem where we do tap these experts, the policy making and the decision making structure in Malaysia is such that the people who are right at the top of decision making, whether it's the KSUs or more pertinently the ministers and even Prime Minister, they may not have the ability or the capabilities to use that information and then to channel it into decisions, whether
Policies,
strategic or tactical, in ways that can push the agenda for the country forward. What do you say?
Good point. I've always believed that the professionals are not doing a professionally good job. Give an example. If you're an advisor, be an advisor. Don't be a sycophant. Unfortunately, most advisors end up being sycophants.
So they tell the minister what they want to hear.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the minister, if the minister, so it's like this. I mean, this is not visual. It's not visual, or whether it's visual. You see, when the minister is going to walk into a ditch, instead of say, "Hey, hang on," that's what we do. Okay. Why?
To maybe protect their own.
No. Yeah, exactly. Why do I mean? And I always fight on this issue. And staffers are not doing their job properly. Staffers, and then if the minister is doing something that he thinks is wrong or not right, just say it. It's your job.
Maybe after you lose your job.
No, but that's the point. That's the point. It's because the fear is that, if I open my mouth, then I'm like, and imagine, I this has always been my argument. If there are 5 advisors, the minister call one, he sings one tune, and the next one sings the same tune. The minister's got no choice. Okay? If the first advisor tells him, "Minister, you're not wearing your shirt right," the minister says, "Go to hell." Call the next advisor. Then the next one come in, "Tell me what you think." And the guy says, "Sorry, sir, you're wearing your shirt wrong." Well, he's going to sack all 5? See what I mean?
Sure.
So be professional in your assessment. But unfortunately, in this country, at least what I know, they don't.
Okay.
They want to please the boss. This pleasing of the boss actually will lead to disastrous result for the boss.
Last question, just based on your response to that. Do you think Prime Minister Anwar currently has enough good advisors that will tell him what he needs to hear rather than what he wants to hear?
Okay, to me is this. I have a problem when we come out with sound bites and that determine our so-called administration. And this is something that I think Malaysian leaders they've caught this fever from perhaps originated from Mahathir.
Okay.
I can't remember what's called Bersih Cakap Mana, whatever it was, the catchline. And we have not seized that. How much energy, time, space had been used to something that could easily be channeled to something more productive.
Okay.
Because everyone knows when this administration is no longer around, or at least this leader is no longer around.
The slogans will change.
We've seen that the last 5-10 years. Satu Malaysia, I don't know what it's called.
Keluarga Malaysia, now it's Madani.
And it's so, short-lived. So because we all know short-lived, why do we still do that? You know what I mean? I find that rather strange.
So you find that Prime Minister Anwar is also adopting the same playbook, and he's not being advised correctly to maybe go more into the substance.
You know what I would say?
Okay.
I would, if I was to advise, I would, when he first became Prime Minister, I say, I'm going to declare my slogan. And my slogan is no slogan.
Okay.
I want to do the work. No sloganeering. Because I'm sick and tired of slogans for the last 30 years and nothing has been produced except seminars, conferences, textbooks, T-shirts and umbrellas and paper bags with
a lot of paraphernalia.
But no substance.
Okay.
I would say no slogan.
Okay.
How's that?
I think that's a fantastic way to end this very engaging session. Thanks so much, Razak, for being here with us today.
Most welcome.
For really sharing a lot of things, probably beyond what I expected, from geopolitics to think tanks, and to your very honest opinions on the intellectual and sort of like academic and even civil service ecosystem in Malaysia that we have, and maybe some suggestions on how to plug those gaps. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hosting you at Taylor's University one of these days.
Pleasure.
With that, I'd like to thank you once again. For those of you who haven't subscribed to our channel, please click subscribe, and hopefully we will bring you more substantive content and not just clickbaity stuff that is there just to get attention. And thank you so much once again, and see you next week.